Hello and welcome to FPL Mate, your best mate for fantasy Premier League content for the 2022-23 season. And my name is Dan, and today we are going to be giving you some noob versus pro tips and trying to give you some explanation of how you can take your FPL game to the next level, from the kind of inexperienced mistakes a lot of people make to those real high level plays. So guys, if you do enjoy this one, please do leave a like, please do subscribe if you're new around here. We've got 14 tips today. I'm sure some of you will know a few of these tips, maybe even most of these tips, but I'm pretty convinced that there will at least be a couple of trinkets of really good information in this video, no matter how experienced you are at FPL. Guys, we're also going to be referring a little bit to these premium FPL subscription services. I really like Fantasy Football Hub. They are my favorite. They are the best in the business, in my opinion, and you can get a link to their service with 50% off. That is in the description of this video, so do go check that out. But yeah, there's just a couple of bits and bobs from them that I think you really actually do need if you want to take your FPL ability really to the elite level. You are going to need to get access to the kind of tools that they provide that you can't really get for free. So yeah, they're actually doing a thing right now where if you subscribe and you don't win your mini league, they will give you your money back. So they are so convinced that this tool or their group of tools are so helpful that they'll give you your money back if you don't win your mini league. So yeah, it's a no-brainer really, guys. So yeah, let's get on with the tips. Like, subscribe. Yeah, let's get on with it. Alright guys, so my first tip today, we're going to start off with the initial team building, and the first tip I'm going to talk about is the goalkeepers. So a lot of people, when they start playing FPL, they think they have to have two playing goalkeepers. They have to have a good goalkeeper starting and a good goalkeeper on the bench. The thing is, if you have a player like Alisson or Edison in particular, there is no game that you wouldn't play them in. You know, like, they're going to get you good points no matter what the opposition is. So really, if you have a really high level goalkeeper, just stick with them. You don't need to have a backup goalkeeper there as well, because when are you going to play that backup goalkeeper really? It's not really going to happen very often. And yeah, a lot of people make the mistake of spending too much money on their goalkeepers when they can usually use their budget far more effectively in other positions. We do often see that goalkeepers in particular are a position where even your 4.5 millions, your 5 millions can compete with the 5.5 millions in terms of points. There's usually not too much of a difference there compared to some of the other positions where, you know, a 7 million defender is going to score a lot more than a 4.5, 5.5 million defender. So yeah, just don't go too hard on spending money on the goalkeepers. Fair enough, have one, but I would recommend going for a bench goalkeeper that is just really cheap and just sticking with one that you think is going to do well. There's options to rotate goalkeepers, but not really a tactic I'm a fan of. In general, if you are rotating your goalkeepers though, stick with two cheap ones to rotate. Don't spend too much money on rotating goalkeepers. Alright, speaking of goalkeepers, a lot of people, when they first start playing FPL, they like to make transfers on their goalkeepers, and it very rarely pays off. This is a position, like I say, where you can't really gain too many points by messing around with goalkeepers too much. So what most more experienced FPL players do is they pick one goalkeeper and they stick with them until their first wild card. Then they'll obviously have a new goalkeeper for their first wild card, and then they'll have a second wild card where they'll get another goalkeeper. Now, we're actually getting unlimited transfers during the World Cup this year, so that basically means that what you're probably going to have is 4 goalkeepers or 4 opportunities to have a new goalkeeper. Well, 3 new goalkeepers, 1 initial goalkeeper, but they will have 4 goalkeepers throughout the course of the season, and those are the points where you think about changing your goalkeepers. Because remember guys, if you swap out a goalkeeper, you never know, even if you're switching them out there against a really difficult opposition, you never know, they could gain like 3 or 4 save points if they're playing in that really hard game. It's very possible. So yeah, do not use transfers on goalkeepers. Pick one and stick with them until you get your either wild card or your unlimited transfers in the World Cup. Alright, here's a really good tip. People often say, oh, do I have to spend all of my money? Is it okay to leave a bit of money in the bank? And absolutely, it is fine. It's absolutely okay to leave a bit of money in the bank. And I think more casual players, more new players maybe, will be very tempted to upgrade players in their, initial draft, just because they feel like, oh, I have the spare money, I may as well upgrade a player. But you don't need to do that. If you're happy with your team, don't upgrade a player. Don't, add more money to your team if you don't feel like you have to. If you've got 0.5 million in the bank, if you've got 1 million in the bank, just leave it in the bank. If you're happy to keep that money in the bank, you're happy with your team already, there's no need really to spend all your money. And you know what? Having that money in the bank could be a huge advantage when it comes to making your transfers for game week 2, game week 3. You can suddenly, you have more options than a lot of other people will do in terms of transfer. You'll have more flexibility, so it can actually be a really good idea to keep money in the bank. And if players change in price prices as well, that can be a big factor as well. So say you've got an 8 million midfielder, but you want to switch them to a different 8 million midfielder in Game Week 2, but the different 8 million midfielder has actually gone up 0.1 in value. They're now 8.1 million. The only way you can make that transfer in one single transfer is by having a little bit of money in the bank to start off with. So don't be afraid to leave a bit of money in the bank, guys. All right, another thing casual players often do is they will buy these defensive midfielders in FPL, often just because they have 0.5 million in the bank. So they think, oh, I'm just going to upgrade a 4.5 million to a 5 million. There really is no need to do that. These kind of players will not score really any more points than your 4.5 million midfielders anyway. So that 0.5 extra that you spend on a Rice or a Kante or a Moutinho, it is very, very rarely worth it. And these kind of players, you're probably not going to play anyway. They're probably just going to stay on your bench. So that 0.5 million is really a kind of a waste of money. So if you have got a 5 million player in your team right now, or 5 million midfielder, should I say specifically, think about either upgrading them, downgrading them, or going for a more attacking but slightly riskier 5 million player. So for example, you can go 5.5 to Neto. He's a good 5.5 million. You can go for someone like Bailey or Almiron, who are attacking players who are still at that 5 million price point, but a little bit riskier. Or you can downgrade to a 4.5 like Andreas Pereira, for example, who is very likely to get just as many, if not more points than your Rices, your Kantes, and your Moutinhos, but you get them for 0.5 million cheaper. And that 0.5 million could go a long way, could make a real difference in your team. All right, here's a big one, even bigger this season than ever before. Don't spend too much money on your bench. People are very tempted to make sure they have a full playing squad, loads of players that I absolutely love. But the thing is, most of the time, the only players you're ever really going to play is the players that are in your starting 11. Maybe you rotate one player on your bench with another player in your starting 11. But generally speaking, if you want different players for different game weeks, that's what your transfers are for. So you don't need to worry about spending too much money on your bench. Focus on keeping the first 11 absolutely stacked. Spend all the money on your first 11. And in particular, this season, we're going to see a situation where you're not really going to need to depend on your bench as much as we have seen in previous seasons. We haven't got COVID, for example, as much as we did do in the last couple of seasons. So there's going to be less cancellations of games due to COVID. We've got a situation where we've got 5 subs, the 5 sub rule. So even if one of your starting 11 players doesn't start the game, starts on the bench, it's very, very likely that they are going to come off the bench, be substituted on, because there's more opportunities for players to be subbed on from the bench into the starting 11. And also, guys, an extra thing, there's some great 4 million defenders, 4.5 million midfielders as well that are actually going to get some game time. So why not go for one of them instead? And, if you absolutely need them in an absolute emergency where one of your starting 11 doesn't play, you have that option there. So don't spend too much money on your bench. Focus that budget really on your starting 11. Okay, here's something that I think personally, I don't know if everyone will agree with me, but I don't really like the idea of spending too much money on premium players. A lot of people really like the idea of having Salah, Son, Haaland, Kane, De Bruyne. They want all of these players, and they spend all of their money on all of these real premium, real expensive players, and that really neglects the rest of their team. So a lot of these tips, by the way, guys, are just making sure you don't neglect too much of your team. If you're focusing too much on one thing, you end up neglecting other areas of your team, and that often happens when you go for 3 or more premium players. I mean, 4 premium players is just crazy. 3 premium players, I think, is still too much. At the end of the day, these really expensive players, what gives them their value, so much value over the 8 million players, for example, is the fact that these players are captainable. And if you have a Salah, a Son, and a Haaland, are you really going to captain all of these players? If you think over a 10-game week period, are each of these players going to be captained, 3 or 4 times each? Probably not. There's probably going to be one of them that you're only really thinking about captaining maybe once every 10 games. In that case, is it really worth going for them? Or can you split the money up and go for 2 8 million midfielders or something like that? Instead, go for a 7 million defender and an 8 million midfielder instead of that 12 million midfielder or 12 million forward. It's just, spreading your money out a little bit more and making sure you're attacking with your team on all fronts rather than focusing too much of your money on just these super expensive players. All right, this one is a kind of an interesting one. Again, it's about not detrimenting the rest of your team too much, but make sure you don't go too different. Like, I know I like a differential. I know I speak a lot about differential players, players that are a little bit different, players that will spice up your team a little bit. But typically, more experienced FPL players will go for the tried and tested, you know, the trusted players. Some players are highly owned. They're popular for a very good reason. You know, your Salah, your Jesus, Cancelo. These are really high-owned players, but they're high-owned for a reason. And if you neglect all of these players in favour of just trying to be too different with your whole squad, then you're probably going to suffer a little bit and fall behind. It can go right, but often is the case that it doesn't. More often than not, it will go very wrongly. I'm not saying players like, you know, De Bruyne, Havertz, Cresswell on screen are bad, but if you have too many of these differential players and ignore all of the players who are popular for a very good reason, you're probably going to end up suffering for it. Alright, this is an interesting one. This is about price points, something that I only really understood over the last few years, to be honest. And the idea is that you pick players that are all slightly different prices rather than buying a lot of players that are all similar price. So, for example, on screen, these two sets of midfielders are roughly the same price. But you can see on the casual side, we've got Bowen, Mount, Mahrez and Sancho, who are all very similar price. And on the pro side, we've got Salah, Saka, Rashford, Neto, who are all fairly different prices. And basically what this means is that on the pro side, you can see that if you want to make a transfer, you have a player at each different price point. So if you wanted to swap to another 8 million midfielder, you can swap Saka to another 8 million midfielder. If you want to go for another premium, you want to go for Son maybe, you can swap Salah to Son. If you want to go for, I don't know, Martinelli, for example, Rashford, you can swap into Martinelli, and Neto, you could swap to, I don't know, a Bailey or someone like that. On the casual side, however, it's a little bit different. If you want to go up to a Salah or a Son, you're going to actually have to use 2 transfers to make essentially 1 transfer move. So if you want to swap Bowen for Salah, you're also going to have to downgrade someone else to do that. And similarly, if you want to go down, you know, you find a player who is really cheap, you want to go for, you know, Neto starts the season really well, but you've got Sancho who isn't doing well. Suddenly, you've got to downgrade Sancho to Neto, and you've got 2 million in the bank that is kind of wasting away and is not invested in your team. So by playing price points and making sure your team is diversified in terms of all kinds of different players from all different types of price points, it makes transferring players much easier and really helps your flexibility when it comes to making transfers in those initial weeks. Alright, here is a big one, and I see people making this mistake all of the time, and that is people depending too much on the official Fantasy Premier League website's Fixture Difficulty page, which is just wrong. It's just crazy wrong. It's too simple, and we know that football is not a simple game, and this is what I'm saying. Coming back to, you know, premium tools like Fantasy Football Hub, which I definitely 100% recommend. I think they're pretty much essential if you really do want to be competitive in FPL. But by going for a more premium service like the Fantasy Football Hub's fixture ticker, it is just so much better because you can do all kinds of things with it. So, for example, let's have a look, guys. Okay, guys, so this is the Fantasy Football Hub fixture ticker tool, which is just really good, so much better than the official FPL's version. I've got the range at 1 to 4 game weeks here, and we can see that Arsenal have the best fixtures of any team, Aston Villa second, Brentford, Liverpool, but this is already better because we can see things like Crystal Palace, green fixture on the FPL website, but this ticker takes the data and kind of understands that Crystal Palace away is actually kind of a difficult game. And similarly, the FPL website says Leicester is a hard game, but this has got Arsenal versus Leicester in Game Week 2 as a slightly easier game because these use actual data to kind of predict how well each team is going to perform against another team, rather than just making you know, predictions based on the size of the club, for example. We can also change here to attack. So often fixtures are good for attackers but bad for defenders. So for example, if we go on attack, actually Brentford have the best opening fixtures for attackers because they play teams like Manchester United, who at the official FPL would say that's a hard fixture, but actually it's not. That's quite a good fixture for an attacker. We've got some other good fixtures there, and we can see at the bottom Crystal Palace have very bad fixtures if you're an attacker. If we go on defence, on the other hand, we can see things change a little bit. So Aston Villa actually have the better fixtures for defenders. They're expected to do very well defensively versus Bournemouth, Everton and West Ham. These are teams, I guess, that don't score a lot of goals, even Crystal Palace there. Teams that don't score too many goals. You know, Arsenal and Spurs here up here as well. Pretty decent fixtures from a defensive points of view. So it doesn't always align the defensive fixtures versus the attacking fixtures, and I just think that the official FPL version of this just gives a terrible view, and you really do need to get a proper fixture ticker to get a better view of who has the best fixtures and what the attackers have for the best fixtures, what the defenders have for the best fixtures. You can do overall as well if you want to do it that way, and you can change the game week range if you want to get a better idea. This is just so much more intuitive. It's so much better. And the other one I want to talk about in terms of these premium services is looking at data. The official FPL website is not good for data. A lot of people just go, oh, who has scored the most points recently? Who has, you know, scored the most goals or got the most assists or got the most clean sheets recently? And often that doesn't paint the full picture, and you end up missing out on some real hidden gems by just looking at very, very basic data. So I'm going to show you something else. Now, this tool here, guys, is something I use literally every day to try and figure out what players I want to buy in FPL. I'm going to set the range. We're going to have a look at some of last season's data. We'll set the range from game week 19 onwards. So we look at the second half of last season. We're going to hide low minutes players, and we're going to try and get an idea of what players did very well in the second half of last season. Let's go per start as well, because totals don't always give the full picture. Sometimes you want to see when a player is actually starting games, how many points do they get? And you can see here, De Bruyne is at the top. We also got other things. We've got things like expected goals. We've got, I think it's, yeah, there we go. Salah right at the top there for expected goals per game, 0.75 expected goals per game over the course of the second half of the season. Harry Kane, Raheem Sterling up there as well. Bet you didn't know that one. We've got kind of expected assists, so who are the most creative players? De Bruyne, Kane again, Salah. Did you see that one coming? Probably not. But this is kind of information that you don't really have access to unless you really find a tool that is specifically designed to help you out on FPL. There's loads of other things you can do on here. You can have a look at the defensive stats. You can have a look at set pieces. You can have a look at all kinds of things like that. But yeah, this is just so much more in depth. So if you really are looking to be really serious about FPL and really get involved in the stats part of FPL as well, you're going to need to have something like this. This is by far my favorite. Like I say, I use this every single day to make videos, to try and work out what players I'm going to buy and what players I'm going to recommend to you guys. It is just so good. So definitely recommend that over the usual stuff you're probably using. But there you go, guys. That's it for the Fantasy Football Hub spiel. Like I said, if you do want to get 50% off your membership, do go check out the link in your description, in my description, should I say. It will change your life. It will change your life in terms of FPL anyway. Alright, so a lot of you guys will know this already, but those of you who don't, it is not very, it's not really recommended to use your chips early on in the season. If you are a first-time player, you may not know this, but later on in the season, we are going to get things called double game weeks, blank game weeks, and these are basically where fixtures are kind of a little bit messy. So in double game weeks, a team of, say, Arsenal, for example, may have 2 games within one game week. So if they have 2 games within one game week, that means they have 2 opportunities to score points. And if we get a bunch of teams with these double game weeks where they have 2 opportunities to score points, what a great opportunity for a triple captain. Would you rather triple captain on a game week where your player plays 1 game, or when your player plays 2 games? Pretty obvious, right, guys? Same with free hits. Sometimes we get a blank game week, for example. You might want to use a free hit on a blank game week, just because on a blank game week, some teams will have no fixtures. So you'll go for a whole game week, and some of the teams won't even have a fixture. So you may actually need to use a free hit to try and get a full 11 in your team that actually plays a game. So save those chips. They are so much more useful. They are so much more powerful later on in the season. So that is definitely the pro strategy to chips. Don't use them too early. Save them. Trust me, it'll be worth it. Okay, this one is going to look really obvious when I explain it, but trust me, most people, well, a lot of people do not think this way at all. So looking at the 2 players on screen right now, who is the best player to buy? Well, most of you guys will probably say that Saka on screen right now is probably the best player to buy because they've got consistently fairly decent returns. But a lot of people do make these knee-jerk transfers where they only really look at the last game week. They look at 1 game week data sets, which are just not very useful. For the Mahrez situation on the left-hand side, he scored 10 points in game week 5. Does that mean you should buy him in game week 6, or should you buy Saka for game week 6? Well, when you look at the form, when you look at the consistency, Saka is actually the better pick because he's scoring points more consistently. But a lot of people will make the mistake of going for Mahrez just because he played very well for 1 game. Maybe he's not favoured. Maybe the goals were, maybe the goal was lucky. But just try and look at more than just last game. We try and look at a larger set of data. some people like, you know, a lot of game weeks information to make decisions, but sometimes just 3 or 4 game weeks is enough to go by. You can see the kind of form a player is in. So don't be afraid to buy a player who was just blanked just because there's some other options that had one good game week. You know, go for those consistent options, I suppose. Yeah, in this situation, Saka is the better pick, but that's not to say that you can't go in early on a player who's just hitting form. It's just a lot riskier, and you've got to think about it a lot more before you do it. Don't just look at FPL points, for example. All right, this is one that I have only really kind of recently learned, I say over the last couple of seasons, but maybe last season and a half, and that's just to not be too proud, not to be too stubborn. Often I would buy a player, and this was particularly bad because I'm obviously on YouTube. I want to make myself look really smart and really clever, and I'm never wrong. And what I do is I buy a player and just refuse to sell them no matter how badly they did, because I thought, well, I picked this player for a reason, obviously. I am going to be right eventually. I'm going to wait until I am right. And what I actually should have done is just sold the player, got on with it. It's okay to be wrong. Sometimes your picks don't work out. Make the switch, go for the new big thing. Don't be too patient with a player that you've got. That's not to say never be patient with a player. Context is very, very important, but don't be too stubborn with your players and be prepared to sell them if it doesn't go well. Don't be proud. And for the final tip today is don't make too many transfers to try and get the perfect team every week. Unfortunately, it is just not possible to have the perfect team every single week, and you should be thinking about your team in a kind of 4 to 5 game week kind of scope, I guess. So yeah, don't worry too much if one of your players has a difficult game, or one of your forwards has a game against one of your defenders or your goalkeeper. You can't have the perfect team every single week, and if you take too many hits by making too many transfers, you're going to be far worse off, particularly if you're taking players out just to bring them back in a couple of game weeks later. It ends up getting really, really messy, and you may as well just have kept the player in the first place. And if they're a good player that you're keeping, then they'll probably may even score in a game that you think is a difficult game. So don't make too many transfers just to try and get the perfect team every game week. FPL is not played in individual game weeks. This is the whole idea that individual game weeks count for anything really, but they don't. It's about the whole season. It's about the combination of all 38 game weeks. And if you didn't know your scores in one game to another, all you would care about is the total at the end. So don't focus too much on individual game weeks. Wow, that was a lot of tips, but yeah, hopefully this is going to be really helpful for you guys who are maybe slightly newer to the game, but I'm sure there might have been some good information for those of you guys who've been playing it for a few years. Like, certainly I would have loved a video like this a couple of years ago when I started trying to be more competitive in FPL, but yeah, hopefully you did enjoy it. Please do leave a like if you did. Please do subscribe if you want more FPL content on your screens. Don't forget, guys, if you want to check out Fantasy Football Hub, do go check out the description. They have got some free stuff on there as well if you do want to just get a little bit of a taste, a little bit of a preview for their stuff as well, so well worth a look if nothing else. But there we go, guys, plenty of content to come this week. I'm going to try and upload 2 times per day, which is going to be difficult, but I'm going to try and double upload every single day up until Friday. So yeah, wish me luck on that one. I'm sure it's going to be fun, if nothing else, working very hard on this FPL stuff, but I love it, guys. So yeah, there we go, guys. See you tomorrow for another video or 2, and I'll see you later, mates. Bye bye.